Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie Once Upon a Time in Anatolia. In English then, you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Friends, in today's video, the movie we are going to talk about is called Once Upon a Time in Anatolia. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it. All the interesting facts about this movie in today's video, I am going to tell you. I'm also going to give you all the information on which OT platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production filming, post-production budget, box office collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film. And I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film storyline, star cast, actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end. So let's start the video. Once Upon a Time in Anatolia, Turkish Bir Zamanlar Anadolu'da, is a 2011 internationally co-produced drama film, co-written and directed by Nuri Bilge Ceylan, based on the true experience of one of the film's writers, telling the story of a group of men who search for a dead body on the Anatolian steppe. The film, which went on nationwide general release across Turkey on the 23rd of September 2011, premiered at the 2011 Cannes Film Festival, where it was a co-winner of the Grand Prix. Plot: a group of men drive around at night in the rural area of Keskin, looking for the buried body of murder victim Yasar Toprak. The perpetrator, Kanan, recalls burying him near a water fountain with his mentally challenged brother, but the fact that he was drunk during it, the lack of sunlight, and the repetitive landscapes make it difficult for him to find. As the night goes on, prosecutor Nusret tells Dr. Cemal about a case he was involved in, where a woman correctly informed her husband of her date of death months in advance, shortly after giving birth to their child. He explains that she died of a heart attack, but Cemal points out that she could have brought it on intentionally with medication. Commissioner Nachi stops Small from giving Keenan a cigarette, claiming he has to earn it. The group stops at a nearby village, where the mayor asks Nusret to get Keskin to help fund a morgue, as his town is mostly populated by the elderly and their children want to see their bodies. The wind causes a power outage, and the mayor's daughter brings the group tea, where the beauty of her face by lamplight causes Keenan to shed tears. He explains to Nachi that he revealed that Yasar's son Adem was actually his, which caused a fight in which Yasar was killed. Nachi gives him a cigarette. As the sun rises, Keenan finds the body, and the authorities realize it has been tied. They untie it, but then realize it was bound so it could fit in the trunk of Keenan's car. Having forgotten a body bag, they force it into the trunk of their car. As they return to Keskin, Adem and his mother Gulnaz watch Keenan emerge from the car. Adem hits Keenan in the head with a small stone, causing him to weep. In conversation with Nusret, Cemal notes a specific drug that could have easily been used to induce a heart attack, which Nusret admits he is familiar with due to his father-in-law's heart problems. Nusret muses that the woman may have committed suicide because of her husband's infidelity, but waited to do so after the baby was born, and the way he describes the situation implies that the woman was his wife. Gulnaz confirms that the body is Yasar, and an autopsy reveals the presence of dirt in his lungs after she leaves, indicating that he was buried alive. Cemal omits this from the report. As the technician cuts open Yasar's body, Cemal watches the remaining Topraks leave with Yasar's belongings. Cast: Muhammet Uzuner as Dr. Jamal, Yılmaz Erdoğan as Police Commissar Nachi, Taner Birsel as Prosecutor Nusret, Ahmet Mümtaz Taylan as Police Driver Arap Ali, Fırat Tanış as Suspect Kenan, Ercan Kesal as Mayor Muhtar, Cansu Demirci as Çemil, Muhtar's daughter, Erol Erarslan as Murder Victim Yaşar, Uğur Arslanoğlu as Courthouse Driver Tevfik, Murat Kılıç as Policeman İzzet, Şafak Karali as Courthouse Clerk Abidin, Emre Şenas Gendarmerie Sergeant Önder, Burhan Yıldız as Suspect Ramazan, Nihan Okutucu as Yaşar's wife Gulnaz, Kubilay Tunçer as Autopsy Technician Sakir. Production: Director Nuri Bilge Ceylan grew up in a small town similar to the one in the film in terms of mentality and hierarchy, and says he feels a close connection to the characters depicted. The story is based on real events. One of Ceylan's co-writers was an actual doctor, and in order to attain his license, had been required to work for 2 years in the town where the plot is set. The story in the film is based on very similar events the co-writer experienced during this period. The title of the film references Sergio Leone's film Once Upon a Time in the West, and was something one of the drivers uttered during the actual events. When writing the screenplay, the filmmakers tried to be as realistic as possible, and the main aim was to portray the special atmosphere which had left a strong impression on the doctor. A number of quotations from stories by Anton Chekhov were incorporated in the script. The film was produced through Turkey's Zeyno Film, in co-production with the Bosnian company Production 2006 Sarajevo, and the Turkish companies NBC Film, 1000-volt post-production, the Turkish Radio and Television Corporation, Image, and Fida Film. Filming took place during 11 weeks around Keskin, a district of the Kırıkkale province in central Anatolia. It was shot in the CinemaScope format. Reception. The film has been met with critical acclaim. Review aggregation website Rotten Tomatoes gives the film a score of 94% based on 70 reviews, with an average rating of 8.2/10. The website's critical consensus states, "Cerebral and thrilling, Once Upon a Time in Anatolia is a meditative procedural that maintains feverish intensity throughout its unhurried runtime." Metacritic gives a weighted average rating of 82 based on reviews from 21 critics, indicating universal acclaim. Dave Calhoun reviewed the film for Time Out London. Ceylan is a sly and daring screen artist of the highest order and should draw wild praise with this new film for challenging both himself and us, the audience, with this lengthy, rigorous, and masterly portrait of a night and day in the life of a murder investigation. Calhoun compared the film to the director's previous works and noted how it to a lesser extent follows genre conventions. Displaying a new interest in words and story, albeit of the most elusive kind, Once Upon a Time in Anatolia feels like a change of direction for Ceylan and may disappoint those who were especially attracted to the urbane melancholia of Uzak and climates. Beyond being chronological, the film follows no obvious storytelling pattern. Things happen when they do, and at a natural rhythm. Ceylan invites us along for the ride, but only if we're up for it. The film received the Cannes Film Festival's second most prestigious award, the Grand Prix, in a shared win with the film The Kid with a Bike by the Dardenne brothers. The film was selected as Turkey's official submission for the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film, but did not make the shortlist. Sight and Sound listed Once Upon a Time in Anatolia as the 8th best film of 2012. Stephen Holden of the New York Times named it the 6th best movie of 2012 and a searching reflection on the elusiveness of truth. In 2016, the film was named as the 54th best film of the 21st century from a poll of 177 film critics from around the world. Once Upon a Time in Anatolia is a film from Turkish director Nuri Bilge Ceylan, a name some film buffs may recognize. The movie depicts a night-long search for a body in the hills of Anatolia, the steppe of eastern Turkey. The police chief, medical examiner, region prosecutor, and of course, the arrested man who leads authorities in the direction of a body are a crew of epistemological travelers. I say travelers in a literal and figurative sense because the movie is concerned with the assumptions and understandings that characters make and question over the course of one night. The movie progresses linearly and is crouched within the fairy tale, Once Upon a Time vocabulary. The film's narrative is in part a search for truth, fact, and justice, and in part about the impossibility of ontological truth. Examination and explication are attract and repel consistently throughout the film, and this tension is magnificently depicted in a visual and lyric beauty. The characters are human, unexceptional even, which I think allows the film to pose questions on a profound and impossible scale. At the end of the Once Upon a Time in Anatolia, I kept asking myself, what is the doctor thinking? What does he see? I don't know, and I can only suggest and surmise and continue to think and wonder. Once Upon a Time in Anatolia possesses an inherent intrigue and is a subtle, masterful work, worth many viewings and good conversations about meaning. Once Upon a Time in Anatolia, which won the 2011 Grand Jury Prize at Cannes, is 150 minutes long, and its story unfolds slowly and obliquely. I tell you now so you won't complain later. It needs to be long, and it needs to be indirect, because the film is about how sad truths can be revealed during the slow process of doing a job. The Turkish director Nuri Bilge Ceylan doesn't slap us with big dramatic moments, but allows us to live along with his characters as things occur to them. The first 2 hours take place at night on a vast plain in Anatolia, undulating greenly beneath the moon. From a great height, we see 3 sets of headlights snaking down an empty road. Distant figures get out, meander in a field, return to the cars. In closer shots, we discover the caravan is in search of a corpse. The cars contain a police chief, a prosecutor, a doctor, a driver, 2 suspects, and a man with a laptop who will type out testimony. This search will not end until just before dawn. The first suspect has already signed a confession, but is having trouble remembering where the body was buried because he was drunk at the time. The second suspect seems incapable of remembering anything. All the men know the local countryside, but it looks much the same. One watering trough for livestock looks like another. And what does the first suspect mean by a round tree? The men are tired. They know one another well. They get out of the cars many times and poke around. The night is filled with barking dogs. Rain clouds are drawing in front of the moon. There is distant thunder. The driver offers the prosecutor a cream biscuit, and he asks for another. A story is told about a woman who predicted the day of her death and keeled over on schedule. A local mayor is awakened and offers them tea and food. The mayor has a beautiful daughter. The men grow morose as they reflect how in this district she will not find the life she deserves. They are also sad, as many men are, when regarding a woman too beautiful for them to hope for. The mayor complains that he cannot get funds for a new morgue. The young people all leave. The old people die, and the young people want to come home for the first time in years to view them. But bodies do not keep well in the old morgue, and they start to smell. How does this sound to you? I'm told we movie critics praise movies that are long and boring. I can imagine many people finding this movie an ordeal. That depends on how easily they can be drawn into the story that is taking place under the surface and within these minds. A life has been taken. A bureaucratic procedure is being followed. The body is dug up and returned for an autopsy at another morgue, where the coroner complains he needs a small power saw. The doctor looks out the window and sees something that inspires him to lie about the results of the autopsy. We discover in these parting passages how the night has affected them all, especially the prosecutor and doctor, but also the first suspect who begins to cry and the son of the dead man. The little story about the woman who died on schedule takes on great importance. This night has been of crucial importance to some of the characters, and we could not understand that in a different film. Nuri Bilge Ceylan, one of Turkey's best directors, has a deep understanding of human nature. He loves his characters and empathizes with them. They deserve better than to be shuttled around in a facile plot. They deserve empathy. So do we all. Film review: Once Upon a Time in Anatolia. The first shot in Nuri Bilge Ceylan's Once Upon a Time in Anatolia is a dirty window filmed from the outside. A slow zoom and focus pull take the audience through the window to view 3 men drinking, one of whom the audience only ever see again after he has been murdered. The other 2 men spend most of the rest of the film traveling in a police convoy through the mountains in central Anatolia, trying to remember where they buried the body, having since confessed to murdering their friend. Of these 2, only one of them, Kenan, Firat Tanis, is prominently featured in the film, as he rides in the main car that also carries the police commissioner Naci, Yılmaz Erdoğan, and the town's Dr. Cernal, Muhammet Uzuner. The rest of the convoy consists of various police officers, army personnel, and gravediggers, plus the local prosecutor Nusret, Tanner Birsel, the final key character in the drama that takes place during one night and one morning. Once Upon a Time in Anatolia is superficially a police procedural. Even though the killers have confessed, nobody seems concerned about their motives, and all that needs to be done is for the body to be located, if only Kenan and his accomplice could remember where they buried it. Instead, Once Upon a Time in Anatolia is an epic meditation on morality, civilization, masculinity, and how each generation suffers the sins of the one before it. The conversations at the start of the film, as the characters drive through the dark night, are about things such as different types of yogurt. As the night wears on and fatigue and frustration sets in, the conversations become more intimate, particularly between Dr. Cernal and Prosecutor Nusret, the two most educated men who find a degree of common ground in comparison to the more emotional Commissioner Nazi. A story Nusret tells Cernal about a woman who predicted her own death is continually returned to, with Cernal irritated that no logical explanation can be offered for what happened. The discussion between Cernal and Nusret about what can be rationally explained and what cannot underpins the entire film, which often undermines obvious cause and effect narrative developments in order to comment on the difference between knowing the objective truth and believing an interpreted truth that makes life more bearable. Many critics have compared Ceylan to Robert Bresson and Abbas Kiarostami, with his direction in Once Upon a Time in Anatolia also earning him comparisons to John Cassavetes, Krzysztof Kieslowski, and Michael Haneke. Perhaps another director that Ceylan is influenced by is the one that the title of the film most overtly suggests, and that's Sergio Leone, who directed two, arguably three if you include alternate titles, films with titles that begin with Once Upon a Time in. Like the case with many of Leone's films, what happens in Once Upon a Time in Anatolia comments on the broader history, politics, and culture of a geographical region. The main three characters are also identified broadly as archetypes. They are still complex characters developed throughout the film and identified by their actual names, but they are introduced and often referred to simply as the police chief, the prosecutor, and the doctor. Once Upon a Time in Anatolia is about men who are figuratively lost in a vast and indifferent landscape that threatens to consume them. Throughout the film, long shots are repeatedly used to remind the audience how small the characters are in the terrain where the lightning, thunder, and strong winds of an approaching storm create dark foreboding. There is also a sense of the frontier in the film's rural setting. In one scene, the police driver Arap Ali, Ahmet Mumtaz Taylan, speaks about the lawlessness and the need for everybody to fend for themselves. The region is tribally broken up into small villages, one of which the convoy visit and meet its mayor, who is more concerned with building a state-of-the-art morgue than maintaining the village's electricity supply. Death is ever present in this film. Women are almost entirely absent, so that when one does appear, in this case the village mayor's daughter, she is an angelic apparition who moves the men not just to tears, but profound realizations. Despite the absence of cut-and-dried resolution or narrative urgency, Once Upon a Time in Anatolia is compelling and engaging cinema. Ceylan's visual mastery means that the long shots of the men on the mountains not only convey the desired sensation of them being exposed and open to scrutiny, but these shots are simply beautiful. In particular, shots of fields of wild grass illuminated by car headlights at night possess an immense visual power. Ceylan also does extraordinary things with the sound design, including using dogs barking to underpin scenes directly connected to the murder. Combining the sounds of children playing with the sounds of an autopsy brings together the major themes and narrative strands of the film over the end credits. There are deep mysteries in this film, not just about what happened or why, but what it means for the characters and what it means for the audience sharing their journey. Ceylan's direction is so assured that, unlike The Convoy, there is never any doubt that the film is leading to a point where all will be revealed, even if that revelation is not immediate, tangible, or easily expressed. Once Upon a Time in Anatolia is a 2011 Turkish drama film directed by Nuri Bilge Ceylan. It's one of the director's lesser works. A group of men set out in search of a dead body in the Anatolian steppes. This is just a basic premise behind the movie that would suggest it's going to be a crime story, but it ended up being nothing of the sort, for better and for worse. This is a pure dialogue-driven drama that only has some crime elements, but is mostly squarely focused on touching upon a variety of themes. Yes, the dialogue is dense, needless to say. It is so dense, in fact, that even I, as a fan of this type of movie, found it to be too much. It's a procedural on its surface, which is not my favorite genre of storytelling, so that was a hurdle for me. Most of the themes lie within this area of expertise, but thankfully a more psychologically insightful examination of such themes as suicide, obsession, police work, and so on was present. But again, the movie deals with so many of these themes over such a long period of time that the end result is somewhat diluted. The Russian literature elements were the best, with others failing to garner much traction. Ceylan usually is excellent at making extremely long movies, and he is great at character studies, but this time around his characters were of a lesser quality. The doctor and the prosecutor do make an impact, and their conversations and dynamic are easily the most memorable of the bunch. The acting is also universally terrific from everybody involved, especially from Uzuner and Erdoğan. I just wish others received better treatment. Once Upon a Time in Anatolia has a very loose storytelling structure, which personally bothered me as I prefer the opposite in my films. The cinematography is strong, and the editing is also pretty good for such a long movie, but again, the slow pace of the movie, coupled with its extensive runtime and somewhat repetitive structure, made it not that engaging of a watch. Ceylan has made better movies, so this one being his most important work is baffling to me as I find it to be quite overrated. The first shot in Nuri Bilge Ceylan's Once Upon a Time in Anatolia is a dirty window filmed from the outside. A slow zoom and focus pull take the audience through the window to view three men drinking, one of whom the audience only ever see again after he has been murdered. The other two men spend most of the rest of the film traveling in a police convoy through the mountains in central Anatolia, trying to remember where they buried the body, having since confessed to murdering their friend. Of these two, only one of them, Kenan Firat Tanis, is prominently featured in the film as he rides in the main car that also carries the police commissioner Nachi, Yılmaz Erdoğan, and the town's doctor Chernal, Muhammet Uzuner. The rest of the convoy consists of various police officers, army personnel, and gravediggers, plus the local prosecutor Nusret Taner Birsel, the final key character in the drama that takes place during one night and one morning. Once Upon a Time in Anatolia is superficially a police procedural. Even though the killers have confessed, nobody seems concerned about their motives, and all that needs to be done is for the body to be located if only Kenan and his accomplice could remember where they buried it. Instead, Once Upon a Time in Anatolia is an epic meditation on morality, civilization, masculinity, and how each generation suffers the sins of the one before it. The conversations at the start of the film, as the characters drive through the dark night, are about things such as different types of yogurt. As the night wears on and fatigue and frustration sets in, the conversations become more intimate, particularly between Dr. Cernal and Prosecutor Nusret, the two most educated men who find a degree of common ground in comparison to the more emotional Commissioner Nachi. A story Nusret tells Cernal about a woman who predicted her own death is continually returned to, with Cernal irritated that no logical explanation can be offered for what happened. The discussion between Cernal and Nusret about what can be rationally explained and what cannot underpins the entire film, which often undermines obvious cause and effect narrative developments in order to comment on the difference between knowing the objective truth and believing an interpreted truth that makes life more bearable. Many critics have compared Ceylan to Robert Bresson and Abbas Kiarostami, with his direction in Once Upon a Time in Anatolia also earning him comparisons to John Cassavetes, Krzysztof Kieslowski, and Michael Haneke. Perhaps another director that Ceylan is influenced by is the one that the title of the film most overtly suggests, and that's Sergio Leone, who directed two, arguably three if you include alternate titles, films with titles that begin with Once Upon a Time in. Like the case with many of Leone's films, what happens in Once Upon a Time in Anatolia comments on the broader history, politics, and culture of a geographical region. The main three characters are also identified broadly as archetypes. They are still complex characters developed throughout the film and identified by their actual names, but they are introduced and often referred to simply as the police chief, the prosecutor, and the doctor. Once Upon a Time in Anatolia is about men who are figuratively lost in a vast and indifferent landscape that threatens to consume them. Throughout the film, long shots are repeatedly used to remind the audience how small the characters are in the terrain where the lightning, thunder, and strong winds of an approaching storm create dark foreboding. There is also a sense of the frontier in the film's rural setting. In one scene, the police driver, Arap Ali, Ahmet Mumtaz Taylan, speaks about the lawlessness and the need for everybody to fend for themselves. The region is tribally broken up into small villages, one of which the convoy visit and meet its mayor, who is more concerned with building a state-of-the-art morgue than maintaining the village's electricity supply. Death is ever present in this film. Women are almost entirely absent, so that when one does appear, in this case, the village mayor's daughter, she is an angelic apparition who moves the men not just to tears, but profound realizations. Scenes I liked. I'm not going to talk about too much about the plot and its themes after my first viewing, so let me share some of my favorite cinematic scenes in this film. Few films are about simply waiting and talking, but this is one, a film in which, for most of the time, nothing appears to be happening, but in fact, everything is. Nuri Bilge Ceylan's new film is long and difficult, and perhaps not for everyone, but I can only say it is a kind of masterpiece, audacious, uncompromising, and possessed of a mysterious grandeur in its wintry pessimism. Nothing in it reminds me of Sergio Leone, incidentally, unless it is that long wait at the beginning of Once Upon a Time in the West, with the keening wind wheel and sighing desert. Actually, this has something of Antonioni or Chekhov, or even the later stories of Tolstoy. The action extends over a single, rainy, sleepless night and into a grim morning at the workplace. A convoy of official vehicles, containing police officers, the state prosecutor, a medical examiner, and guys with shovels, are accompanying two prisoners out into the eerie expanse of the Anatolian steppe, the plain where Asia reaches west into Iran, Armenia, and Turkey. The men are murder suspects, but are evidently about to plead guilty and perhaps, in a sentencing deal, have promised to lead officers to a body. One, Kanan, Farhat Tanis, is all-important to the police, and this haunted wraith of a man is the center of the film. Their excursion started at the end of the working day, with everyone anticipating a quick discovery. But to the cops' fury, the prisoners become muddled. They can't remember exactly where the corpse is in the darkness. The quest continues into the deepest night, stopping periodically at likely-seeming spots, and at one stage for a meal from a local mayor. There is mostly nothing to do but talk, but the occasion inspires something other than ribaldry. When they see how heart-stoppingly beautiful the mayor's daughter is, they become thoughtful, solemn. Kanan is reduced to inexplicable tears. Mortality has become very real, as it always will, to any of us in the middle of the night. And always the presence of that victim, out there somewhere in the rainy blackness, nags at their minds, exhuming dark thoughts. Ceylan shows that it has a sobering, clarifying, perhaps even ennobling effect. The reason for the crime is never spelled out, although there is a discovery that casts a new light on Kenan's relationship with the victim. What is important is the ancillary, internal drama, the interactions between the careworn officials made possible by this deeply disagreeable task. Without the narcosis of sleep or work, they are forced to think about their lives, or perhaps about the fact that, in T.S. Eliot's words, they have nothing to think about. The handsome, distinguished state prosecutor Nusret Taner Birsel, a man who prides himself on his resemblance to Clark Gable, recounts an anecdote to the young doctor, Chemal, Muhammet Uzuner, intended to demonstrate that death can just come along and there's nothing we can do. But the doctor, a scientist and rationalist, questions his story in such a way as to open up a terrifying insight into the prosecutor's life. Ceylan displays pure, exhilarating mastery in this film. It is made with such confidence and flair. In one shot, he shows us a tableau of 5 men in a car, 2 cops in the front, and between the 2 officials in the back, there is Kenan, his gaunt figure in darkness. The 4 lawmen's faces are illuminated in the faint flame light, but Kenan's is just an outline, and Ceylan holds the shot, moving the camera forward just slightly, until it dawns on us how disturbing his silent presence is. Perhaps his most quietly spectacular flourish comes near the end, a virtuoso moment. The doctor, exhausted after this punishing night, comes into his office and switches on his computer. He notices, as he must surely do every time, personal photos of himself. Ceylan enigmatically suspends the film's action just to show us these images. A series of stills fill the screen. The doctor as a young man, in love. There is something heartbreaking in it. We are heading towards a terrible anti-miracle, as a discovery comes about the victim, and a decision must be made about how much to reveal. We are witness to the jettisoning of Chamal's innocence, and the final loss of that refined, boyish quality that had intrigued and amused the cops during their long night. It has been his own rite of passage into the disillusioned manhood that everyone else joined a long time ago, police and murderers both. With his two early features, Distant, 2002, and Climates, 2006, Ceylan has showed himself a superb filmmaker. This is his greatest so far. In about 150 minutes of screen time, Nuri Bilge Ceylan takes you on a journey about how a corpse can change lives and reveal hidden truths within those who serve the law. This Cannes Film Fest Grand Prix winner proved to be a mesmerizing feature film about the nature of mankind when it comes to dealing with the concept of justice. Once Upon a Time in Anatolia follows an entourage of crime solvers and truth seekers trying to find a corpse located somewhere in the Anatolian steppes. Throughout this journey, said entourage seeps into the rhythms of the night as the search grows longer and longer, to the point that the night ends and a new day starts. This search begins with a sort of dark, humorous tone that turns into irritation. A film that sounds like it would be a thrilling and exciting crime drama turns out to be this introspective and slow-burn crime drama that unearths not only a body, but the truth. Plot review. With Once Upon a Time in Anatolia, the biggest challenge as a viewer is to keep up with the slow-burning nature of the plot. Once you get past this, though, the film really shines. The entourage mentioned before consists of police detectives, a commissioner, a doctor, and two suspects in the crime. The beginning, for the most part, is just a fill-in-the-blank of the case at hand, a murder. Moving away from the exposition, the characters start to paint portraits of the dead body through their dialogue with each other, while they drive from fountain to fountain and hill to hill looking for said body. The frustration behind the search stems from the fact that the murder suspect, Keenan, was drunk at the time of the murder and cannot properly recall the murder itself. The tone starts to take a turn about a quarter of the way through the movie, the point where it started to feel like there was something else going on. The film felt very grounded in its approach to the dynamic between cop and suspect, with its use of force and sometimes outright abuse towards the suspect. Another thing that added to this feeling of being grounded was the conversations between the characters that would reveal their own psyche, even those who were quieter than others. There were some moments where it felt like the story was splintering into some other side story that didn't really make sense at the time, specifically with the character Keenan. This is all tied up into an almost perfect knot by the end of the movie, as the pieces are put together with help from the characters. The overall atmosphere and setting of the film were very bleak for the most part, and really added to the intensity of the plot and the unnerving descriptions of the victim's death. All in all, the film felt like a tour of the countryside where the director had lived and where his friend worked as a doctor, which ended up working really well for the story and direction that Once Upon a Time in Anatolia took. Characters acting. The acting in this film is stellar. A great majority of the lines delivered in this film are done in such a way that it feels gut-wrenchingly real to hear as an audience, but in the way that it keeps your eyes glued to the screen at the same time. Ahmet Mumtaz Taylan does a great job as Arab Ali. He specifically had his best moment in a monologue scene where he was talking with the doctor about the nature of the times they live in and what people have to look out for. Ferhat Tanis is also a big highlight of the film in terms of the way he fits into the story. It took a level of genius from director Ceylan to make it so that the prosecutors sound more emotionally unstable than the murder suspect. The biggest highlights in terms of character were the doctor, Muhammet Uzuner, and the commissioner, Yılmaz Erdoğan. The performances of the two are something to truly behold and take note of for for future reference. Overall, the film was realistically acted and cast perfectly down to even the very small side characters. Final rating. When all is said and done, this film is a 5 out of 5-star movie. It truly is something that shakes the very being of the viewer to the core and had me interested in the murder mystery from start to finish, no matter how slow the pacing is. Upon rewatching, it is super satisfying to notice things that led to the discovery at the end. The attention to detail of the film is almost something of magic, and its ability to stay true to reality is beyond impressive. The film is truly deserving of the win at the Cannes Film Festival. Once Upon a Time in Anatolia is available to watch on Mubi through Amazon Prime channels. Listen, I'm an easy mark. Call your movie Once Upon a Time in, and I'm highly likely to want to see it. Once Upon a Time in the West is my all-time favorite film. On the days when it isn't Gremlins 2, the new batch, and anything that promises to deliver a little of that movie's operatic grandeur has my attention. I'll even check out something that's 3 hours plus by someone I've never seen on the possibility that it might get me a fix of that aesthetic. Of course, more often than not, those titles aren't chosen as conscious homage, and the movies that come with them bear no resemblance to Charles Bronson taking revenge on Henry Fonda. Once Upon a Time in Anatolia is certainly no Leone ripoff. It has its own sensibility, low-key where Leone was operatic, dead-eyed where Leone was sentimental, wet and gray where Leone was dry and dusty, but in this case, the title does strike me as a deliberate nod. How else do we explain how the movie begins? A wordless sequence with 3 characters, supposedly waiting for something, as the slow pace and sound design do the cinematic heavy lifting. Suddenly, a noise, and off we go into the title sequence. Credits over, and we follow a group of policemen as they search through a field. Also along for the ride are prosecutor Nusret, Taner Birsel, who's worried about getting to Ankara the next day, murder suspect Kenan, Ferhat Tanis, who's supposed to know where the body is, Dr. Chamal, Muhammet Uzuner, in charge of the autopsy and the group's moral compass, as well as a coterie of hangers-on. As the search progresses, it becomes clear Kenan was mistaken about where the body lies, and after some guesswork, they move on to the next location. Much of the rest of the night, and much of the film's 2-hour running time, is then spent in some sort of cursed loop. The group finds a location, searches through it, finds nothing, decides upon the next one, drives away. Rinse and repeat. In theory, Once Upon a Time in Anatolia is a procedural, taking us from the search for a body up to the autopsy. But the actual crime matters little. For most of the film, possible murderer Kenan is our only real connection to it, a pitiful, devastated man who suffers much abuse, both verbal and physical, at the hands of the exasperated policeman. What matters much more is the chit-chat that happens along the way, and which exposes the company as petty AF. Mundane complaints, attacks based on a meticulous pecking order, dirty jokes, small rabble rivalries. The tragedy of the situation is that what should be a sobering event, a man has been brutally murdered, is ground down into an inconvenience, as the endless stream of bickering drowns out any solemnity the situation might provide. These men are not monsters. They all carry their burdens, and even hot-headed bully Nazi, Yılmaz Erdoğan, no relation, suffers from having a kid with a disability. But taken together, their behavior feels disgusting, and this is how we end up feeling sorry for someone who might very well have committed a terrible deed, and scoffing at the officers' protests, delivered in the usual hard-boiled cliché style of the psychological toll the job takes on them. And yet there is poetry too, and moments of true dread, as well as some dark laughs. Harmless is what passes for nice these days, was my favorite quotable. We are in a very male world here, and the few women that are more than extras are defined mostly by their relations to men, someone's grieving widow, someone's youngest daughter. At one point, the group take a rest in a nearby village, looking up the town mayor, Ercan Kesal, which both opens a whole new area of petty bureaucratic grievances and also leads into the film's eeriest, most lyrical segment. During this, the mayor's daughter, Kansu Demirci, appears to bring the men tea and to lend a note of grace to these dirty proceedings. You could hardly ask for a better illustration of the male gaze. She literally exists in the film to be looked at. Almost no word escapes her lips. Is this critique or symptomatic? Answers on a postcard, readers. I've always tended towards insomnia, and in my youth turned this tendency into a passion, reveling in the exhausted feeling of greeting a new day without having had a wink of sleep. This film captures that feeling superbly, with the lack of sleep weighing on the characters more and more as we head towards dawn and then into the following day. Once Upon a Time in Anatolia, without giving too much away, is a movie about giving up, and it makes you feel how you could. I mean, they're just so tired. In short, I was right. The filmmaker was capable of even greater heights. Yet this level was only reached after the slight hiccup and regression that was 2009's Three Monkeys, a good but ultimately unsatisfactory formula film that, despite virtuosic moments, was uninvolving. Ceylan's latest film, 2011's Once Upon a Time in Anatolia, Bir Zamanlar Anadolu'da, is involving yet existential, crafted yet natural, sublime yet base, based on a true story yet utterly mythic, and a few other polarities that I think readers of this essay will prefer to discover for themselves. That stated, let me tell you what this film is not, despite the gush of praise from critics who have praised it, mindlessly critically cribbing from each other, despite not even remotely understanding the very film they praise. Once Upon a Time in Anatolia is not a police procedural film, nor is it an homage nor riff on Sergio Leone's cinema. As to the first charge, yes, there is police procedural work that provides the external scaffolding structure of the film, but to state that this film is a police procedural is akin to stating that Huckleberry Finn is a book about the perils of 19th century river rafting. It utterly misses the point that the film merely uses the scaffolding of the police procedural to dig at the existential issues its characters are dealing with, or, in many instances, not dealing with, even as they tangentially dart in and across their lives. And, at an even more profound level, the film is not even about the existential dilemma of a murder, which most critics seem to see as central to this film. No, this film could have been about a visit from a local exterminator and what he encounters at a gnarly woodshed, and it would still have been a great work of art. That's because the film is primarily about its characters, who they are, why they are, how they are, and became what they are. We never get easy answers, and at a material level, we sometimes get no answers. But it's the way that Ceylan does or does not answer that is at the core of this film's greatness. And in reality, even Ceylan's non-answers are just seeming non-answers, for in their demurrals are the answers, albeit not always the ones even a perceptive viewer will seek. But enough critical wax, onto some basics for the nonce. On a purely surface level, the plot of Once Upon a Time in Anatolia is as follows. A murder has occurred, seemingly involving two brothers, a woman, Nihan Okuchu, and her son, and her murdered husband, Erol Araslan. The body has been hauled from an unnamed Turkish town in the Anatolian steppes out into the countryside. We see three cars driving in the fading twilight. Among the men in the cars are Dr. Cemal, Muhammet Uzuner, local cops, the local prosecutor, Turkish version of a district attorney, Nusret, Taner Birsel, police chief Nachi, Yılmaz Erdoğan, two manual laborers armed with shovels, and the two suspects, a smarter brother named Kenan, Ferhat Tanis, and his seemingly insane or retarded brother, Burhan Yildiz. The film is by far the most dialogue-dependent of any of Ceylan's films, and as with the bulk of the film, the early portion is filled with masculine banter as the three cars drive around in the dark, looking for the spot the brothers claimed they buried the body, which may be in a field or in the hills near a round tree. The cops think the brothers are deliberately giving them the runaround for fun, and this seems plausible, save for the fact that neither suspect is bright. It is only by film's end that the viewer realizes the reason that the brothers are unsure of where the body is buried is because they likely did not commit the murder, but are simply taking the blame for another person, possibly the widow, whose son is claimed by Kenan to be his, not the dead husband's progeny. Kenan claims that he had to kill the husband in self-defense after he drunkenly told him that the boy was his child biologically. A seemingly trite and convenient excuse that can cover much truth. Once the body is found, the ineptitude of the searchers becomes apparent, and when the action switches back to the local town, a mob wants to lynch the two brothers while the son of the dead man tosses a rock at Keenan that hits his real father in the eye. The prosecutor and doctor resume their talk on the gorgeous lady, and this is where the unspoken reverberations of that anecdote really tie the characters into the viewer's expectations, as, after the autopsy's formalities are finished, we see the doctor's assistant discover that the dead man had soil in his lungs, meaning that he was not dead when buried, but rather buried alive. Given that the two suspects are strong men, this leaves open the possibility that someone smaller and weaker may have thought they killed the man. Clearly, the doctor thinks this as well, and starts adding up in his mind the discrepancies only he has noticed throughout the film. He tells the assistant and the official autopsy recorder to omit the fact of the soil in the lungs from the official report. The film ends with an ambiguous whimper as we see the widow and son walk away from the hospital, as the doctor watches them from his window, a circular nod to the film's end, where the camera peers in at the murder victim's last hours. Yet, as stated, none of this is really what Once Upon a Time in Anatolia is about, and even if my surmise about the real story under the film is wrong, the point is this film is not a whodunit but a whydunit, and one on an existential order, not a material one. But it's not all gloom, angst, Sturm und Drang. There is a searing void of color to the humor the film inflicts into the wounds it creates in the psyche of its digesis and exegesis. In a sense, this is the sort of film that Quentin Tarantino might make if he were to ever reach puberty. Probably my two favorite light moments are when, once the body is discovered, the lawmen go on a Clark Gable riff, and, a little later on, when they are about to head back to town, they discover that no one has brought a body bag, and the dead man has to be twisted into one of their car's trunks. But the trunk is also filled with fresh food from the men's late-night supper at a small-town mayor's home, where all the men are enraptured by the mayor's pretty teenage daughter, proving that pedophilia, or technically ephebophilia, knows no geographic boundaries. In short, this is the sort of film where rewatching it will only bear more such ripened fruits. It is the kind of film that only the dumb and inane think is slow and long, for although being almost an hour longer, 157 minutes, than Three Monkeys, it feels much shorter. Technically, the cinematography, in real nighttime conditions, about 75% of the film is shot in darkness, is hypnotic. The only visual flaw of the film is a too obvious imposition of a rock face that is illuminated in a lightning strike as the doctor urinates, and cinematographer Gokhan Tiryaki gets major kudos, but even more so is the almost non-existent soundtrack, whose power is palpable and shows how utterly superfluous most soundtracks are. The screenplay, by Ercan Kesal, Ebru Ceylan, and Nuri Bilge Ceylan, is the best in a Ceylan film yet. The reason for this is that it has all the depth and poesy of Ceylan's earlier great films, Climates and Distant. Plus, it has some really dazzling dialogue, which is a major expansion of Ceylan's writing powers. For the dialogue ranges from the diurnal, buffalo yogurt, lamb chops, pissing, to the metaphysical, death, ethics, purpose. The DVD, put out by Cinema Guild, presents the film in a 2.35:1 aspect ratio, where the white subtitles are framed against the black bars. There is no English language dubbing option, nor is there a commentary track. There are a number of good features, though, including a series of making-of documentaries, a 24-minute-long interview with Ceylan from the Cannes Film Festival, where his film won the Grand Prix for Best Film, and a theatrical trailer. The negative feature is a trite, cliché-filled video essay by an inane someone named Hayden Guest, who, it turns out, is the director of the Harvard Film Archive, and a booklet on Ceylan's filmography. Ceylan is as calculatedly withholding a storyteller as ever, and as one might expect, Anatolia never comes right out and explains itself, though the men's free-ranging conversations suggest the film has much on its mind. The consequences of adultery, the suffering of children, and the limited hope for the future they represent. The shortage of resources in a rural village where the men enjoy a late-night repast with the mayor, co-scribe and Ceylan regular Kesal, or the recessive role of women in Turkish society, underlined by the presence of only two actresses in brief, virtually dialogue-free performances. However specific its concerns, the film feels universal in its diagnosis of collective malaise. After the intense dramatic exertions of three monkeys, Ceylan seems to have deliberately moved into less accessible, more oblique territory. The drama unfolding just off screen is in fact as rife with deception, betrayal, and violence as that of monkeys. But this time the Helmer seems to be observing it all from a mournful side angle. Yet despite, or perhaps due to its relative lack of incident, Anatolia feels like the more mature work, suffused with a wry, tolerant humanity that finds its chief expression in the strong, character-rich performances. As aimless as the men's wanderings feel, there turns out to be nothing arbitrary about the carefully chosen time frame. From first moment to last, this is a story overshadowed by death, allowing its characters the space in which to reflect on their lives. Though its glacial pacing will represent a significant hurdle for many viewers, the film grows steadily more involving as dawn breaks, and the men make their way back home, and its unflinching observations of the legal and medical establishment at work frequently rivet. Visually, it's as gorgeous a film as Ceylan has made. Teriyaki works a steady stream of miracles in the nighttime passages. Rarely have faces been more beautifully illuminated by firelight in images that have the graceful glow of a Vermeer painting. Nuri Bilge Ceylan has to be the least kinetic of working filmmakers, and not simply in the sense of static camera work or lack of narrative momentum. Whether earlier, character pieces like Distant and Climates, or more plot-heavy recent outings like Three Monkeys, his films feel somehow devitalized, stripped of life. To look at Ceylan's output in a certain, perhaps ungenerous, light is to see little more than a succession of striking, if overly studied compositions, tenuously strung together. The director's framings obviously come with great care, but for at least a decade, there's always been the sense that here was a filmmaker struggling to find suitable content around which to wrap his picture-making. The addition of genre mechanics wasn't the solution in Ceylan's previous outing, Three Monkeys, and neither apparently is pairing an absurdist fable with a sliver of morality play, at least on the evidence of his latest effort, Once Upon a Time in Anatolia. Wherever you find a can of worms, look for a woman, says the police chief. Barely present on the screen, women occupy a significant part of the men's thoughts and desires. After Kanan repeatedly fails to lead the caravan to the body, was he too drunk to remember where he buried it, or did he have nothing to do with the killing, or at least with the burial? The prosecutor suggests his men get something to eat at a nearby village. Partway through the meal, but not before we've been given a lesson in the priorities of impoverished Muslim villages, the lights go out. And then an amazing thing happens. The youngest daughter of the village leader brings the men tea, her softly curving face with its perfectly proportioned features illuminated, as in a la tour, by the oil lamp on her tray. Each man she serves looks up startled and then transfixed by her beauty. Unknowable emotions flicker across their faces. After this incongruent, almost miraculous moment of grace, the discovery of the corpse the next morning seems almost an afterthought. The caravan returns to the town from which it had presumably departed, and the doctor performs the autopsy, which adds yet another twist to the crime. Or does it? But just before this ambiguous climax, there is a second, perhaps even more unsettling appearance by a woman said to be the widow of the man who was killed, and the lover of the man who confessed to killing him. Only those who perpetrated or witnessed the killing know the who and the why of it, and even they might be confused about the how. By eliding the murder scene, Ceylan refuses us that knowledge. Once Upon a Time in Anatolia, which won the Grand Prix at Cannes last year, is the most complicated, beautiful, and haunting of the 6 features made since 1997 by the director who put the new Turkish cinema on the international movie map. The title of Nuri Bilge Ceylan's Once Upon a Time in Anatolia suggests something like a fairy tale, and perhaps somewhere at some time to someone it will be. A tale told to a wide-eyed child on a father's knee, asking for stories of the good old days. At least that's what the characters muse about when faced with its bleak events. But the events they are faced with are anything but children's stories. The film centers around a group of lawmen driving aimlessly through the dark, escorting a murder suspect to the scene of the crime in order to exhume his victim's body. The problem is the suspect doesn't remember where he buried it and in the dark, all the locations look pretty much the same. So this solemn caravan travels from place to place, seemingly searching for a needle in a haystack. Along the way, the men share stories from their lives, getting to know each other on this long, grueling night. What they don't know is that this night will resonate for the rest of their lives. Perhaps not in the fairy tale way they joke about, but internally, in ways they may not realize at first. Once Upon a Time in Anatolia is a modest, carefully crafted meditation on truth. Each of its characters are on a journey of discovery, but what makes it so compelling is that no one actually knows it. For everyone involved, this is just another day at the office. You won't find any Hollywood self-discovery cliches here. No one sets out to find themselves or anything so cliché as that. But what at first seems to be part of the routine in retrospect is anything but. By the end of their trip, these men will be forever changed. Their perception on truth and the necessity of lies will be completely altered. Once upon a time in Anatolia, a group of men ventured out into the countryside, and they were never the same again. Ceylan directs with such understated grace that its shifts in tone are almost imperceptible. It is at once a dark comedy and a cerebral examination of essential human truths. It's a slow burner, and casual viewers might find it tough going, but the rewards it offers are great indeed. It does drag a bit in the second half, but as Ceylan reveals subtle meanings of his work, it becomes more and more engrossing. There are no twists per se, but each new gradual revelation feels momentous, as if the audience is joining the characters on their spiritual and intellectual journeys. It's a deep and complex narrative that reveals itself slowly, taking its time to observe rather than push itself into any kind of unnecessary drama. Ceylan allows the narrative to unfold organically as the audience slowly reaps its rewards. Each new discovery is as pleasurable and as thought-provoking as the last, adding up to a deeply resonant cinematic experience that continues to grow in estimation upon further reflection. Ceylan, the auteur behind such films as Climates and Three Monkeys, makes films that don't seem like much at the time, but the more they are reflected on, the stronger they become. The essential truths his characters discover may seem small, even simple, when viewed on a personal level, but their ramifications are tremendous. They're the kind of universal revelations one can easily apply to their own lives, and that's what makes Once Upon a Time in Anatolia such a treasure. Anatolia could be anywhere. Its protagonists could be anyone. Its characters find comfort in lies when the truth brings impossible pain, and that is the conundrum at the film's quietly naturalistic heart. At what point does a lie become a mercy? Is ignorance really bliss? In a never-ending search for truth, when is a falsehood more of an inherent good than the truth? Even at 2.5 hours long, Ceylan weaves a gripping drama that exists in the mythical gray areas between truth and lies, exploring probing questions in endlessly fascinating and enthralling ways. Like a modern-day fairy tale, it comes with a moral, but unlike the fairy tales we know today, this moral doesn't come tied with a bow. It is meant to be contemplated and reflected upon. It's a question, not an answer. But in the lonely backroads of Anatolia, the answer we're looking for may not be the truth at all. The first 2/3 or so of Nuri Bilge Ceylan's Once Upon a Time in Anatolia, his first film since 2008's Three Monkeys, which earned him a Best Director award at Cannes, are frustratingly hypnotic in their ability to string the viewer along without really depicting any story-furthering events. The film's premise, revealed slowly and methodically, follows a group of officials, Prosecutor Nusret Taner Birsel, Commissar Naci Yılmaz Erdoğan, and Dr. Jamal Muhammet Uzuner, as they escort two criminals, Ferhat Tanis and Burhan Yildiz, through the swerving, winding, hilly roads of rural Anatolia. The crooks have confessed to a murder that occurred a few days ago. Problem is, they were inebriated at the time and can't seem to remember where they buried the body, and it's hard to blame them wholeheartedly, considering the near-perfect symmetry of every pit stop they encounter. It's nighttime too, which makes matters worse, though the situation proves a welcome obstacle for cinematographer Gökhan Tiryaki, who completely soaks up the chilling nighttime atmosphere with frames that are often guided by nothing more than the dim glare of the brigade's vehicular headlights. Ceylan's own restraint, with respect to the atmosphere is no less respectable. He relies on natural elements, particularly the incessant noises of barking dogs, howling winds, and crackling thunder, to develop the eerie surroundings. The nighttime sequences are crucial in enhancing the philosophies of these characters, even if they may seem tangential at the exact moment they occur. After repeated instances of Nachi berating his two suspects for their navigational inefficiencies, it's not hard to question the relationship of a later dialogue scene between Nusret and Chamal that documents the apparently out-of-left-field story of an unseen woman who, to Nusret's knowledge, accurately predicted the exact date her death would occur. The old people die, and the young people want to come home for the first time in years to view them. But bodies do not keep well in the old morgue, and they start to smell. How does this sound to you? I'm told we movie critics praise movies that are long and boring. I can imagine many people finding this movie an ordeal that depends on how easily they can be drawn into the story that is taking place under the surface. And within these mins, a life has been taken, a bureaucratic procedure is being followed. The body is dug up and returned for an autopsy at another morgue, where the coroner complains he needs a small power saw. The doctor looks out the window and sees something that inspires him to lie about the results of the autopsy. We discover in these parting passages how the night has affected them all, especially the prosecutor and doctor, but also the first suspect, who begins to cry, and the son of the dead man. The little story about the woman who died on schedule takes on great importance. This night has been of crucial importance to some of the characters, and we could not understand that in a different film. Nuri, Hussein, one of Turkey's best directors, has a deep understanding of human nature. He loves his characters and empathizes with them. They deserve better than to be shuttled around in a fill plot. They deserve empathy. So do we all. Few films are about simply waiting and talking. But this is a film in which, for most of the time, nothing appears to be happening. But in fact, everything is Nuri Bilge's new film is long and difficult, and perhaps not for everyone, but I can only say it is a kind of masterpiece, audacious, uncompromising, and possessed of a mysterious grandeur in its wintry pessimism. Nothing in it reminds me of Sergio Leone, incidentally, unless it is that long, long wait at the beginning of Once Upon a Time in the West, with the keening wind wheel and sighing desert. Actually, this has something of Antonioni or Chekhov, or even the later stories of Tolstoy. The action extends over a single, rainy, sleepless night and into a grim morning at the workplace. A convoy of official vehicles containing police officers, the state prosecutor, a medical examiner, and guys with shovels are accompanying two prisoners out into the eerie expanse of the Anatolian steppe, the plain where Asia reaches west into Iran, Armenia, and Turkey. The men are murder suspects, but are evidently about to plead guilty, and perhaps in a sentencing deal have promised to lead officers to a body, one Keenan fire at. Tanis is all important to the police, and this haunted wraith of a man is the center of the film. Their excursion started at the end of the working day, with everyone anticipating a quick discovery. But, to the cops' fury, the prisoners become muddled. They can't remember exactly where the corpse is in the darkness. The quest continues into the deepest night, stopping periodically at likely seeming spots, and at one stage, for a meal from a local mayor. There is mostly nothing to do but talk. But the occasion inspires something other than Riley. When they see how heart-stoppingly beautiful the mayor's daughter is, they become thoughtful, solemn. Keenan is reduced to inexplicable tears. Mortality has become very real, as it always will to any of us in the middle of the night, and always the presence of that victim out there somewhere in the rainy blackness nags at their minds, exhuming dark thoughts. Sane shows that it has a sobering, clarifying, perhaps even ennobling effect. The reason for the crime is never spelled out, although there is a discovery that casts a new light on Keenan's relationship with the victim. What is important is the ancillary internal drama, the interactions between the careworn officials made possible by this deeply disagreeable task. Without the narcosis of sleep or work, they are forced to think about their lives, or perhaps about the fact that, in T.S. Eliot's words, they have nothing to think about the handsome, distinguished state prosecutor, Nusret. Tanner Birsel, a man who prides himself on his resemblance to Clark Gable, recounts an anecdote to the young doctor. SEO Muhammet Uso intended to demonstrate that death can just come along, and there's nothing we can do. But the doctor, a scientist and rationalist, questions his story in such a way as to open up a terrifying insight into the prosecutor's life. Scene displays pure exhilarating mastery in this film. It is made with such confidence and flair in one shot. He shows us a tableau of 5 men in a car, 2 cops in the front, and between the 2 officials in the back there is Kanan, his gaunt figure in darkness. The 4 lens faces are illuminated in the faint flame light. But Keenan's is just an outline, and Sin holds the shot, moving the camera forward just slightly until it dawns on us how disturbing his silent presence is. Perhaps his most quietly spectacular flourish comes near the end, a virtuoso moment, the doctor exhausted. After this punishing night comes into his office and switches on his computer. He notices, as he must surely do every time, personal photos of himself. Sealand enigmatically suspends the film's action. Just to show us these images, a series of stills fill the screen. The doctor, Atakan, young man in love, there is something heartbreaking in it. We are heading towards a terrible anti-miracle as a discovery comes about the victim, and a decision must be made about how much to reveal. We are witness to the jettisoning of Seal's innocence and the final loss of that refined, boyish quality that had intrigued and amused the cops during their long night. It has been his own rite of passage into the disillusioned manhood that everyone else joined a long time ago, police and murderers, both with his 2 early features, Distant 2002 and Climate's 2006 San, has showed himself a superb filmmaker. This is his greatest so far. Other information about this film. It is quite a long night for them. They have been going around the wide area for hours, but they have not yet found what they are looking for. The sky gets darker, and they become more bored, tired, and frustrated in the deepening darkness. The wind blows ominously the reeds on the field are shaken by the wind, and they begin to reflect on themselves as the search is being fruitlessly continued in front of their eyes. What happens on the surface during the first half of Nuri Bilge's haunting film, Once Upon a Time in Anatolia 2011, can be simply summarized like that. Nothing much happens in the movie, except few small, unexpected things, and they don't make much difference to how the murder case will be closed. We do not know exactly how or why the murder happened, but there is no reasonable doubt about its 2 suspects. The first suspect has already given and signed a full confession about their murder, and all the local police need is the victim's body buried somewhere outside the town. It sounds simple, but the problem is the suspects don't know very well where they buried the body. The first suspect, named Keenan, fire at Tanis, was inebriated when he buried the body. His dim accomplice does not remember a lot about that, although he was not drunk at that time. Keenan says there were a fountain and a round tree near the burial site. But that information helps little because there are many places with fountains in the area, and they all look pretty much same. Whenever it seems that they finally find the site, they are at a wrong place. The movie observes this frustrating procedure in a languid pace, which may test your patience after its opening. Sequence slowly approaching the victim and the suspects at their drinking party before the crime is committed. We get a static long shot of the field under the darkening sky. We soon see the 3 cars coming along a winding road. They stop at one spot near a fountain with a tall, slender tree next to it. The people get out of the cars, and the first suspect is asked whether this place is a right place or not. Everybody else is waiting. They go back into their cars, and move to another place. But again, it's a wrong place, watching their search going on and on with this repeated pattern. I could not help but think of that silly story about an ineffectual general who keeps misleading his soldiers to wrong hills and discouraging them with his befuddlement. I think it's not here, as the cars goes through the darkness, descending upon the vast rural landscape of Anatolia. The movie looks at the people inside the vehicles more closely. There are a prosecutor, Tainer Bell, who leads the investigation, a police chief, Yılmaz Erdoğan, who is getting impatient with the vague memory of his suspects, and a doctor, Muhammet Uzuner, who will examine the body not found yet. They are accompanied with a courthouse clerk, a police officer, drivers, soldiers, diggers with shovels, and of course 2 handcuffed suspects. We observe several trivial things about these people while going along with them. The police chief and his men talk about yogurt and a government off. They know the cars are temporarily stopped because the prosecutor needs to relieve his bladder, as he did several times before. It is suggested that he has a problem with his prostate, while the police chief and others continue their mundane conversation in their car. The first suspect remains silent in the middle, with his darkened face filled with guilt and remorse. They stop at another place. The driver who works for the police chief confides to the doctor how hard and thankless his job has been. The doctor muses on the life which will be ultimately surrounded by cold darkness, while the world will remain just the same as before. As they reveal their thoughts, the camera stares at their backs or their wordless faces. They do have a conversation, but it looks as if they conveyed their private thoughts and emotions only to us. We also get one intriguing tale told by the prosecutor to the doctor. It is about a woman who told her husband, supposedly one of the prosecutor's friends, that she would die 5 months later, and died exactly on that day, not long after giving birth to her child. As a rational man, the doctor has a good explanation for her death after taking more with the prosecutor. He also gets a pretty good idea about what the prosecutor tries to seek through telling that strange story to him. As the story filled with subtle touches and opaque feelings, the movie wisely avoids an easy-poured resolution in their interactions later in the story. It is clear that both of them know exactly what they are talking about, although they never acknowledge it to each other, except during one short moment, slowly and leisurely moving his story outside the conventions of its genre for more than 140 minutes. The Turkish director co-writer Nuri Bilge finds space and time wide enough to focus on his characters and their surrounding environment, which are beautifully captured by the cinematographer Gökhan Teryaki, appreciating the notably contrasting looks of the landscapes of Anatolia on day and night. We also feel how much this long night's journey into day is affecting the characters through the wariness shown in their faces. The police chief, who turns out to be more vulnerable and warier than we thought, goes through complex emotions toward the first suspect as he and others come to learn a little more things about their case when they stop by the village chief's house for a quick meal around dawn. It is about 4 a.m. when they arrive. The electricity goes out, and the village chief's pretty young daughter appears from darkness with a lamp and cups of tea on the tray. Everyone in the room bewilderingly looks at her face as if she were an angel in this memorably gorgeous moment. They later talk about how she will grow old alone in her village, where almost all of young people have moved out to cities. The morning approaches, along with their reality, as the second part of the movie begins, and this is not much a spoiler. They finally find the body. The body is exuded and examined under formal procedures. They have a small humorous moment when the prosecutor describes the body with an amusing remark. They have trouble with loading the body into the trunk of one of the cars, but they manage to bring the body to the town hospital. The town has just started waking up, and its atmosphere in the early morning and the looks of exhausted doctor may be intimate to you if you had the experience of working all night, as the night going away and the day coming from the horizon. There is still more work to do for the prosecutor and the doctor, and others. We see the victim's wife and her son. They angrily look at the first suspect, who feels more remorseful because of his personal reason, regardless of whether what he believes is true or not. He committed a terrible thing to that little boy, and he knows that too well. The doctor discovers something notable during the autopsy, but for some unidentified reason, he decides to ignore it. It is not clear whether it is because of something he seems to see from outside the window or merely because of his exhaustion, but it is apparent that small fact will only complicate the procedure while not changing anything in the case. Once Upon a Time in Anatolia deservedly won the Grand Jury Prize at the Cannes Film Festival last year. It is indeed one of those SLO films, but the movie was a rewarding experience, although I lost some of my patience due to its slow progression. During my first viewing, even when watching the characters from the distance, it cares about the them, and I was drawn to their circumstance. I liked the way their humanity can be glimpsed through the small gestures like offering a biscuit, and I began to like some of the people in the movie. As the time goes by, I did not understand or know everything about them, but I could understand how they feel throughout the story, even when they do not say anything. Sign said in one interview, "I think the human face is the most beautiful landscape. The face tells you everything. It's the only way to get to the truth, because most of the time, the words we say are not true. We have a tendency to deceive others to protect ourselves in the end. As the final scene suggests, life will go on as usual for them, and they will probably look back on what they went through during that night from time to time in the middle of their search. One character says to the other that they will probably regard their long journey as one of the amusing episodes in their life. Maybe they will begin like this once upon a time in Anatolia. Sanjang Sucho was born in Jeonju, South Korea. He is a graduate of the Korean Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, KAIST, in Daejeon, where he makes weekly pilgrimages to the local multiplex. He began his blog in 2008, has since written hundreds of film reviews in Korean, while still managing to find time for books, music, exercise, usually treadmill and swimming, and corresponding with EART and fellow bloggers. Once Upon a Time in Anatolia is a 2011 Turkish drama film directed by Nuri Bilge. It's one of the director's lesser works. A group of men set out in search of a dead body in the Anatolian steppes. This is just a basic premise behind the movie that would suggest it's going to be a crime story, but it ended up being nothing of the sort, for better and for worse. This is a pure dialogue-driven drama that only has some crime elements, but is mostly squarely focused on touching upon a variety of themes. Yes, the dialogue is dense. Needless to say, it is so dense, in fact, that even I, as a fan of this type of movie, found it to be too much. It's a procedural on its surface, which is not my favorite genre of storytelling. So that was a hurdle for me. Most of the themes lie within this area of expertise, but thankfully, a more psychologically insightful examination of such themes as suicide, obsession, police work, and so on, was present. But again, the movie deals with so many of these themes over such a long period of time that the end result is somewhat diluted. The Russian literature elements were the best, with others failing to garner much traction. Sin usually is excellent at making extremely long movies, and he is great at character studies. But this time around, his characters were of a lesser quality. The doctor and the prosecutor do make an impact, and their conversations and dynamic are easily the most memorable of the bunch. The acting is also universally terrific from everybody involved, especially from Uzuner and Erdoğan. I just wish others received better treatment. Once Upon a Time in Anatolia has a very loose storytelling structure, which personally bothered me, as I prefer the opposite in my films. The cinematography is strong, and the editing is also pretty good for such a long movie. But again, the slow pace of the movie, coupled with its extensive runtime and somewhat repetitive structure, made it not that engaging of a watch. Sin has made better movies, so this one, being his most important work, is baffling to me, as I find it to be quite overrated. More detail in the last decade, the Turkish cinema has based in the light of filmmaker Nuri Bilge with Once Upon a Time in Anatolia. The writer-director confirms his stature in a long, slow, hypnotic film that explores the human condition through side glances and offhand remarks, caring very little about time, especially the viewer's time, in eventless sequences without conventional action. Even the hardened press audience can burst out in nervous laughter when almost 90 minutes into a film running over 2.5 hours. The first plot point occurs. It's not just the length or the slow-moving storyline that makes the film difficult to access, but the extreme and unfamiliar way in which Sin deconstructs the story about the police looking for a dead man in the hills of Anatolia when the body is at last dug up. FES of guilt and adultery come to the surface. Clearly, this is festival material of a very high level, whose audience will be difficult to conjure up beyond the Kesal and patrons of black tie film events at the same time. For those willing to take the plunge, it is a deep and haunting work that lingers in the memory. Everything seems cut and dried as the film begins. Three friends are laughing together over a modest meal. A few days later, in a search that will last all night long, Two men are being driven around a remote rural area in two police cars and an army jeep. The squinting, silent Kenan Firat Tanis has confessed to murdering Yasar Errol Irisin and burying him apparently with the help of the other man. Now, the police chief Nasi Yasser Doan has called prosecutor Henry Tainer Birsel all the way from Anra to witness the discovery of the corpse. Everything must be done properly, dictated in bureaucratic lingo and drafted into a report. The problem is that as the searchers drive along deserted roads through the windy hills, stopping at likely spots that all look the same in the dark, Kenan fails to locate the grave. The night goes on, and the men grow weary, along with many members of the audience. The party finally stops off in a village for refreshment and are served by the mayor's beautiful daughter. Then it's back to the hills to search for the unholy grave. As in a story by Chekhov, the first half of the film is filled with insignificant conversations that serve to delineate the characters, like the scientific-minded young doctor who's divorced and the hot-headed police chief who has a sick child, as the camera slowly and implacably zooms in on their faces. It seems to reveal their very soul. The chit-chat also abounds with hints which, if the viewer is a good detective, turn out to be highly significant later on. In the spirit of Michael Hankey's Hidden, it's essential to keep the eyes open and catch the clues that will make the ending work. The prosecutor, played with commanding authority and a worldly twinkle in his eye by Tanner Burrell, casually tells the quiet Dr. Muhammed Uzuner about a friend's wife who predicted her own death instead of being impressed. The doctor asks if an autopsy was performed to determine the cause of death. Here, too, lies a mystery. The pace picks up in the film's final hour, which takes place in a provincial town where the suspects are detained, and a grisly autopsy is performed on the body, and things begin to happen, though their meaning needs to be puzzled out. Kenan, the accused man, is attacked by a young boy standing beside his mother, presumably the son of the dead man. Yet, the look that passes between Kenan and the young woman suggests something else, like Sign's celebrated three monkeys. The characters all seem to be in emotionally charged triangular relationships, or as one man comments, wherever there's trouble, look for a woman. Scene's background in still photography informs every shot, which rings with hidden feeling and a sense of intimacy. Gökhan Teriyaki cinematography emphasizes the stark, eerie beauty of the Anatolian landscape, an ancient world of nature that humans can't even see without the help of headlights or a lightning storm. There are many ways to judge the success of a film, and I'm not talking box office takings. It's the enjoyment factor, that shared experience you get whilst watching it. And afterwards, when you discuss it with friends and colleagues, it can be a magical experience when you don't realize that time is passing, and you're wrapped up in that protective and hypnotic duvet. Then, when the film has ended and real life has reasserted itself, the feel of that duvet, be it emotional or intellectual, yes, that can be comforting too, still lingers like a memory of a lover's embrace. The story, like the film, is deceptively simple. A murder has occurred, and two men have confessed to burying the body somewhere in the bleak Anatolian countryside. The film starts with three cars driving around the austere landscape at night, stopping occasionally for everyone to get out and look around, looking for something to jog the killer's memories as to where the body might be. Things are complicated because in the darkness of this long night, nothing looks familiar. The group get increasingly impatient, and that tired, they stop off at a small village where they are fed and can get some brief rest. Then it's back on the road. The body is eventually found that morning. This makes up 2/3 of the film. To say that the film is slow is an understatement, and I would certainly not recommend it to everyone. It's a film in which nothing seems to happen yet. Throughout, I was hypnotized by beauty. Firstly, the cinematography is stunning. As the group wanders the countryside, they are often lit only by car headlights, and we are presented with mesmerizing views of fields of grass, dancing in the wind, illuminated starkly, and surrounded by deep shadows, inconsequential moments, like an apple falling from a tree and tumbling down a hill until it lands in a stream, and then continuing to float until it's stopped by a few rocks, become all-encompassing. And important, this might not sound exciting, but it's strangely beautiful, and in no way so horrific. The topics of conversation are wide, yet again inconsequential, or at least they seem to. The party is made up of police, led by Kamarnasi Mas Erdoğan, a Dr. Muhammet Uzuner is brilliantly understated as Dr. Semal, a prosecutor Tanner Burrell, and several others who are there to guard the two prisoners and to dig up the remains when they're discovered. Initially, it seems that the main character is the commissar, but soon the story focuses on the doctor and the prosecutor. They don't know each other, and the conversations they engage in seem like small talk. Although one story, told in passing, keeps being raised and eventually has a huge impact on the characters, fundamentally changing them and everything they'd previously believed in. In fact, this is the key to the film. The conversations aren't inconsequential, although it's not obvious to start. They serve to define the characters and eventually to even challenge their way of thinking and undermine who they think they are. Importantly, however, nothing is outlined. To the audience, there are no moments where meaning is spelled out. It's up to us to work it all out ourselves. The truth about the characters, especially the prosecutor and the doctor, is revealed more through looks and furtive glances than dialogue. We work it out with the characters becoming party to their secrets and their failings. But we're never lectured to. This is a bold choice by Sin, who puts his absolute trust in the audience. None of this would work if it wasn't for the universally great performances. They are understated, but also deeply impactful, especially Muhammet Uzuner and Tanner Burrell. The real champion, however, is the cinematography by Gökhan Teriyaki, who makes the bleak beautiful and the drab interesting. Once Upon a Time in Anatolia is a man's film, not because of misplaced bravado, although that is certainly on display at times and is somewhat challenged, but because it reflects a society which is deeply hierarchical and misogynist. Women are victims, as revealed in the conversation, focusing on the beautiful young woman and the men's lamentations about her inevitable decline and lack of opportunity in her life, or the victim's wife, who is offered sympathy whilst at the same time being ignored in her grief and is looked on as almost inconsequential. The lot of the women in this life is undoubtedly sad. However, at no time are these men put on a pedestal, and they are certainly not there to be admired. They may have more opportunity, but they are still victims of their surroundings. I admit that I know little of Sign's work. He has won the Grand Prix prize at Cannes twice for Once Upon a Time in Anatolia, and his 2002 film Yak, English title Distant, his 2014 film Winter Sleep, also won the Palor. He is without doubt a very accomplished director, who I will certainly be looking out for in the future. In the meantime, I will happily go back to Once Upon a Time in Anatolia. I know there is so much more to it that its depths have only been glanced at and have not been fully appreciated. I will return to it again soon, ready to be hypnotized by its beautiful bleakness. And if this is a film that's gone under your radar, I wholeheartedly recommend that you seek it out. Extra information. Once Upon a Time in Anatolia is a film from Turkish director Nuri Bilge. Name some film. Buffs may recognize the movie depicts a night-long search for a body in the hills of Anatolia, the steppe of eastern Turkey. The police chief, medical examiner region, prosecutor, and of course the arrested man who leads authorities in the direction of a body are a crew of epistemological travelers. I say travelers in a literal and figurative sense, because the movie is concerned with the assumptions and understandings that characters make in question over the course of one night. The movie progresses linearly and is crouched within the fairy tale Once Upon a Time vocabulary. The film's narrative is in part a search for truth, fact, and justice, and in part about the impossibility of ontological truth. Examination and explication are attract and repel consistently throughout the film, and this tension is magnificently depicted in a visual and lyric beauty. The characters are human, unexceptional, even which I think allows the film to pose questions on a profound and impossible scale at the end of the Once Upon a Time in Anatolia. I kept asking myself, what is the doctor thinking? What does he see I don't know? And I can only suggest and surmise and continue to think and wonder. Once Upon a Time in Anatolia possesses an inherent intrigue and is a subtle, masterful work worth many viewings and good conversations about meaning to-date Turkish director. Nuri Bilge has directed 6 features, only 2 of which have made any particularly huge impression in the English-speaking world, huge by the standards of Turkish imports, at any rate. Distant in climates, they fairly close cousins at that very still, slow-moving character pieces, examining the emotional disconnection of life in a modern city. His latest, the K Grand Prix winner Once Upon a Time in Anatolia, is therefore at least something of a surprise. The first half of its expansive 2.5-hour running time takes place entirely on the Anatolian steppes, tens of kilometers from the nearest urban outpost deep at night. The characters, initially at least, are so abstract, so obviously standing rather than independent agents, that for the most part they're referred to by profession, not by name, and yet Anatolia is unmistakably a ceiling film. Superficially, at least, its exhausting real-time focus on a criminal investigation played out in unforgiving LA takes looks a little bit like Tar, a little bit like Tarkovsky, all the usual. Suspects in connection, plotless, idea-driven films with inflated running times and several minutes in between every cut. But the precise flavor of the clinical humanism that keeps sneaking out is absolutely typical of Sign's work. It takes a while before we've quite figured it out. The opening scene is so willfully obscure that the director even rubs our noses in it, filming the action through a distorted window. But what ends up drifting up through the clouds of quotidian chatter about family food, work, and other assorted gossip is that a man was killed, and of his 2 murderers has agreed to show the police where they buried the corpse. Unfortunately, all he really remembers is that it was by a round tree, a little way from a fountain, and given that the Anatolian countryside is lousy with trees and fountains, and given that it's pitch black out, all that the suspect fire at Tanis has been able to do is get the chief of police, Yılmaz, the state prosecutor Taner Birsel, doctor serving as coroner Muhammet Uzuner, and a small coterie of officers lost in wreck. The Bondu eventually, he remembers, or chooses to remember, where the body can be found, and shortly after sunup, the victim is recovered and sent back to the city. There, the prosecutor and doctor both have a good long chance to compare notes on the experience. No, that does not sound like 150 minutes worth of content. And there's no shame in thinking that Anatolia sounds incredibly boring. The nasty truth is that it is boring, if that's the word you really feel obliged to use. Boring in the same sense that the infamous driving scene is in Solaris, to name one example. We are made to suffer through the same pointless back and forth deadened meanderings as the characters in order to better understand what their minds go through over the course of a frustrating night. It would be one thing to structure the plot as Seen and his co-writers, Abu Se, his wife, and Erkan Kesal do, along a string of references to a peculiar anecdote in the prosecutor's life. It would serve much the same thematic purpose, which is to call into sharp relief the prosecutor and the doctor's different ideas about reality and truth, if used basically the same way in a 90-minute film. But the way that Anatolia plays out, the anecdote isn't just plugged in because it shades nicely into the film's deeper meanings. We get to play along with the doctor, as it were, as he spends the downtime in the long evening and morning rolling the prosecutor's story around in his head. And considering it when he brings it up again later, it doesn't feel like a metaphor being struck. It feels like the culmination of a lengthy thought process that we've been privy to. Of course, there's also the expected way in which the inflated running time allows Sin to indulge in tremendously precise, detailed depictions of moments throughout this process. A long scene of a farmer's daughter serving the policeman a late dinner would not have anything like the same effect if it were shorter, and would probably not have found itself in a more concise film anyway, and I for one would not give up that scene for anything. There's no way around admitting that the film is a difficult, pretentious thing. It is a film of ideas about morality and truth, which get discussed in elliptical ways, then in more direct ways, and then transmuted into action in an ending that sucked all the air right out of me when it came along. All the more so because it's not stressed in a big OMG moment, but because it is done in the same methodical, procedural way as the rest of the film, and some of the conceptual angles are played a bit hard. It's naggingly clear that there is only one moment in the whole film in which a woman speaks, for example, and that Selin is using not just this fact, but the specific line and the context in which it is spoken to suggest things about the assumed cruelty and arbitrariness of our masculine authority figures. If only that moment didn't work so freaking well. With its surgically precise close-up, it would be easier to find. Science tactic annoying. Still, very good films deserve a bit of work, if for no other reason than it makes the audience value them more. Anatolia is as much work as anything else I've seen this year, and it might well be a bit too esoteric for its own good, but the film anchors to itself such a powerful atmosphere of chaos, giving way to order through its obvious but well-played night into day structure that I was myself helpless to resist it. This film, directed by Nuri Bilge, written by Nuri Bilge Kinkwa Abu Sain, produced by Zan, or Atakan, starring Muhammed Uzuner Erdoğan Tanerbel Cinematography Goentiaki, edited by Bora Gingal, Nuri Bilge Production Company, Zeyno film, distributed by the Cinema Guild. Release states, May 21st, 2011, in 2011 Cannes Film Festival, September 23rd, 2011 in Turkey. Running time 157 minutes. Country, Bosnian Heroina, language Turkish. So guys, this is the review of Once Upon a Time in Anatolia movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.